Welcome to the talk. Um, and I think first of all, I want to tell you why I think this talk is important and what we're gonna cover. So I will be kind of talking today about, my own financial journey and the role of kind of money in the nervous system regulation, and then we kind of move a little bit towards some kind of roadmap towards financial stability and independence. So at the end of this talk, you will have some kind of pointers of, what you can do for yourself to reach some of that stability and independence, right, in terms of your finances. And so, why I think this talk matters and why I think it's important. I think for those who know me, you know that I primarily teach, embodiment, body-led transformation, um, as well as nervous system regulation. And that nervous system regulation is important because when we are dysregulated, it really affects all of our life, right? It affects what kind of decisions we make. It affects how we relate to others. So if we dysregulate it, we can be quite grumpy and reactive or angry sometimes, all of those things. And it impacts our decision making. It kind of impacts our well being and how, I suppose, stressed or not stressed we are. And that's why nervous system regulation is really important in our life if we want to live a kind of lives where we're more resilient, more grounded, and have opportunity to chill out a little bit. And in all of this, one thing become very important or kind of apparent to me, which is the effect of money and financial situation on the nervous system. And I think it's something I really just couldn't ignore, knowing myself, what it means to just, keep on working beyond, my capacity, feeling constantly burnout, feeling drained, constantly worrying about money and stressing, am I going to keep my job, trying to please my manager and all of that, and just waking up feeling like, is this going to be my life? Because money, and I don't think I have to tell it to anybody, money and financial situation have just such a important impact on our life and our feeling of safety and well-being and how relaxed we can be in life. And this is why I wanted to do this talk, because I just feel it's really important that we do talk about money and that we do talk about financial skills. And what I really would like you to take out of this talk is I would like to plant a seed of possibility that a different life is possible for you. Life where you can feel more financially stable and more financially independent. That it is doable and possible for many of us, right? If not for everybody, to reach this kind of financial situation. And this is something where I arrived quite recently, and I will tell you again about my financial journeys and the kind of key learnings along that line. But I finished my PhD in September, and I decided to not come back to the career I used to have. I used to work in tech, where I kind of reached the point of burnout. And being on that financial journey, I suddenly realized, oh shit, I can actually semi-retire. And it kind of blew my mind because I never expected that would happen for me. When I originally started to kind of work on my money situation, when I started to invest, when I started to save up. And I think because I have quite good financial system in place, and again, I'm not a millionaire, I'm not like a finance bro, I'm nothing like that, but I am somebody who have degree of financial stability in freedom when I can just relax a little bit. where I can, I only need to work now 2 days a week with all the little streams of passive income that I have, which means I have space to pursue my passions, such as this talk, or do nothing if I choose, right? So I really want to share my own journey, and I really want to share this as a possibility for you, that you could also get there, right? Not through kind of six-figure, coaching things, this kind of gimmicks, crypto investing and all that stuff, but through a financial kind of strategy that is more kind of sustainable, right? It is a long-term strategy, but it is much more sustainable, and just works with our nervous system to, as I said, achieve this kind of stability and safety in life. So, with all that in mind, let me tell you about my own financial journey. So, I haven't started with a lot of money, not at all. I come from a working class Poland, so not from wealth in any dimension. There isn't anything kind of special about me in a way where I don't have capacities that are different than anybody else, right? I'm just a working class girl from Poland, well, a woman from Poland, right? And in fact, I, for a big part of my 20s, I was quite a vagabond. I lived on I lived on people's sofas. I was a kind of squatting. So I had zero financial education and zero financial skills. And as I kind of started to build my career, as I said, I used to work in tech. And one of the first key financial moments for me was when I got a chance to work on a financial product for investment institution. So we were building this kind of mobile app for struggling savers. And this was a real eye-opener for me, because as a result of working on that project, we also received a lot of financial education. And actually everybody on our team, we all started to look at our money and realize, like, oh shit, we are screwed, because none of us had things like safety funds, none of us, like our pensions were non-existent, and we were all like, oh my gosh, we are in deep trouble. And this project really opened my eyes on how important it is to be financially educated. And one of the things that happened during this project was that I used to work as a researcher. So I was doing research with people, with struggling savers, trying to understand, people's saving habits, what makes a struggling saver versus what makes a successful saver. And I remember at one point I was doing these interviews, and I was chatting with these two girls. They were both students. They were both in very similar financial kind of situation where they would have a part-time job, and one of them was always kind of worried about money. She would only kind of check her account at the end of the month to make sure she have the rent, for the next month, and she was always just really worried and stressed about money. She was the struggling saver. And pretty much straight after, I was talking with another girl who, again, was very similar situation. She was also a student. She also had a similar part-time job. But she would have this kind of £500 buffer. She didn't worry about rent money. She was just a little bit more organized with her money. And the real difference was that one had that kind of financial education and was on top of her money. So she would check her account regularly, knowing, okay, I need to know how much I'm spending or not. And that was the real reason between those two kind of girls that I were talking to. And it really made me think, like, well, maybe it's not about how much you earn, although of course, that is important, right? There are people who are living below poverty line, and there are circumstances when that really matters. But for a lot of us, actually, what it comes down to is very much about this financial regulation and that financial control. So this was the kind of first point in my life, really, when I started to think a little bit about money and think about that education, and I started to invest in my own financial education. And the second point came when I very briefly dated this kind of accountant guy. I don't know if we could even call it a dating, but he was very keen on money. He really understood money. He had that kind of money thinking, and he kind of educated me a lot about money, which was really great. And what he did, he really changed the way I understood money. So something he was really talking to me about was treating money not the difference between a liability and an asset. You know how people say, rich people, they don't work for their money, they make money work for them. So what I mean, at that time I was kind of looking at buying a flat. I already, because I started to kind of have that financial education and I started to save a little bit, I was kind of already thinking about buying a flat. So he kind of explained to me the difference between liability and an asset. So when you buy a flat, it can become a liability. So, which means it's something you have to pay in to maintain, right? You have to pay into, keep the roof, fixed. If your boiler breaks down, that kind of drains your money. There is this kind of upkeep, which means your flat has a cost, right? Which is then a liability to you. However, if you start to think about a flat as an asset, then you think about it in terms of that flat making money to you. So what that meant in practice, when I came to buy my flat, I was very clear that I'm not gonna buy the most expensive flat that I can buy with my mortgage, but instead I'm gonna buy a very affordable flat, still within certain compromises and levels of comfort that I wanted and the quality that I wanted. But I didn't went for the most expensive flat, and I went for a two-bedroom flat, knowing that I always have the option to rent out one of the rooms, which then can make me money. So you see how is that different when you have a flat that kind of costs you money in terms of a maintenance, etc., and it's a liability, versus when you have a flat that can actually help you make money, and when it becomes an asset. So it's about making money, right? So this really changed how I thought about money and how I planned for my finances, realizing that okay, if I want to have this kind of stable financial situation, I have to find ways for money to work for me, so that I can generate, passive income and all of those things. And shortly about that, a third important thing happened to me in terms of finances. So at that time, I already started to dream a little bit of future. I started to think about, escaping my job. And I would watch all those kind of videos of people living on the boats and sailing the world, like I was very inspired by that. And in one of these videos, one of the channels that I followed, there was this kind of guy, a little bit older. Right? He must have been in like 50s or 60s, living on his boat, and he also used to work in tech. And he started to talk about this philosophy called FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early, which is basically a philosophy that combines frugality, and I don't want to call it frugality, I rather call it mindful consuming. But it combines this kind of idea that when you become frugal and you are able to save up and put away a lot of money, you can then start to invest your money in index funds, which then start to grow what you have. And using kind of the compound interest, which is where over time your interest, when you over time start to earn interest over interest on the interest on the interest. And the basic idea of that fire philosophy is that within 10 years, anybody can actually retire, right? So it allows you to generate enough passive income to actually retire within 10 years. And at that time, of course, that felt really unrealistic for me, because I thought, like, like, this is like magic, 10 years and I could retire. I mean, like, who does that? That's, it just didn't feel realistic. But it gave me enough inspiration to just follow that a little bit, right? So I also started to get interested into index fund investing, right? And I started to put first a little bit away, and then by the year 2 or 3, I started to realize, like, oh, this actually may be working, because I started to kind of see my money growing, right? 8 years on, which is today, I suddenly realized, and this was, as I said, after finishing my PhD, I suddenly realized, like, oh, I actually, okay, I'm not totally where I should be in terms of, early retirement, but actually I do have enough to semi-retire, which means right now I am in a position when I can only work 2 days a week. And with little bits of passive income from my flat and from, a bit of investments, I actually can only work 2 days a week. And it really blew my mind, because I never expected this could be possible for me. And yet here I am. And this is why I say that within this talk, I really want to plant this seed of possibility for you, because I totally didn't believe at the time when I kind of started my financial journey that it's gonna work out for me. My friends were kind of like laughing at me that I'm joining pyramid scheme and all of that, and I didn't even believe myself, but I seen enough in that. I saw that kind of vision of possibility, that maybe this could be a thing for me. And I am here to say that that is possible, right? That is something that could work for you too. So, let's talk a little bit about the roadmap towards getting there, because I think one thing is, talking about investments and talking about putting money away. But the reality is that a lot of us starts as this kind of hamster on the chasing on the wheel, right? So I'm talking about, when I talk about finances, I talk about these 3 kind of archetypes of hamster, squirrel, and a tiger. So it is important to realize that, our nervous system and money is really tied to each other. And I said at the beginning that, when we don't have money and when we stress about money, it really upsets our nervous system. But on the other hand, we also self-soothe doing the kind of shopping therapy. And in fact, we live in a capitalist system that on one hand teaches us about scarcity and productivity, and we hear, especially right now, about job losses and redundancies and all those kind of scary things, and that we always have to work very hard to earn our money. So we have this kind of fear. But on the other hand, what we often kind of push towards is to overspend, right? To buy more, to keep on just building status through spending, right? So how many of us want to have luxury cars and stuff like that? Or even, in more simple ways, something that I was experiencing is just like engaging in this shopping therapy where, whenever I would feel bad, I was like, maybe I should buy myself a new dress. Maybe I should treat myself. And those two forces really gets us into this place where our money is totally out of control. So on one hand, we have this kind of survival fear of having enough money, and on the other, we kind of engage with this overspending and this madness. And this is where nervous system regulation can really help us, because we can start to step off that wheel, off that hamster wheel, and through simple techniques like, grounding, where, you catch a breath, feel your sitting bones, arrive in your body. We can start to calm our nervous system enough to start regulating and enough to start to realize, hey, you know what? I don't want to be buying another dress. I don't want to have a credit card therapist. I want to be in control of our money, right? Of my money. And this is really the first step for us to kind of overcoming this kind of madness of, being stuck in the kind of constant loop of fearing, of survival fear and spending. So this is the first archetype, and I guess some of you that's watching are already kind of beyond that, and maybe already starting to save and starting to put some money away. The second step after the hamster is the squirrel archetype. So the squirrel archetype is where, we kind of step off that hamster wheel a little bit. We start to learn a little bit about money when we start to get a bit more financially savvy and maybe start to put money away. We need to kind of embody that squirrel mindset. And what I mean by that, if you think about squirrels, they are really good about two things. One is putting away their money, they're getting their little nuts and their little acorns, and they're stashing them in, they holes in the ground, in the hole in the tree. They just have all those little banks of safety that they start to put away, right? And we have to become a little bit like this squirrel, where we start to stash the money, right? We start to be better at saving. And if you're anything like me, I can tell you that I tried so many budgeting systems, and I try to be like really good with money and try to count my money. But I just don't feel this kind of thing work for me. So what I have to start to do is I kind of when I started to save, I opened a saving account that it was a little bit more difficult to reach. And then the first thing that I would do when the money came in was to send some of the money to that account, right? So I didn't even see that money. I kind of didn't even know that I knew that I have it, but it went there, automatically without me thinking about it. So that, I only work then with what I had left out, right? And this is a kind of funny paradox, because we spend as much as we have in our bank account, most of us, right? So that was the one strategy that that I started me on the saving journey. And then as my money, and of course that was the one account that I knew I cannot touch. It wasn't the kind of overflow account when I would go there and I would at the end of the month I was like, oh, I'm a little bit short. Let me take it. No, I knew that this is the account that I cannot touch. And as my money started to grow, as my savings started to grow a little bit, I started to feel more confident, and I started to feel better in realizing look at that, I already saved up £500 and, £1,000, With time, I started to feel much more confident about saving. And it's also motivated me to just get more and more stashes when I would save money away. So I would, open another account where I would also save up a little bit more, I started to really engage with this saving mindset in a way where, I would have all these kind of little stashes and pots of money put away. The second thing that Squirrel does really well is that she finds many different sources where she can find her nuts and acorns, right? So it's not just one tree. She probably have one tree and another tree, and she steals from other squirrel, and maybe she found a bird feeder and she takes money from there. And we also need to become a little bit like that. So one of the important things in finances is that you always have multiple streams of income, right? Right now, I have my passing investings, I have my part-time job, and I have a little bit of like teaching and, doing workshops where I also kind of getting money. And even when I was working full-time, I would have some other streams of income. And now this doesn't have to be massive, right? It doesn't have to be becoming a second job to you. But having, maybe you have a passion, like you draw or something, and, it's something that you could be making a little bit of pocket money. It's just gonna be enough in creating that sense of safety where suddenly you're not gonna be solely reliant on your main job, but you start to see, oh, here I have some money coming in, and here I have a little bit money coming in. Maybe if I lose this one main job, it's not gonna be the end of the world because there are other streams of income, and this is really crucial that you start finding other ways to make money. And thinking that all those extra money you make is actually can become your saving fund or your investment fund if you choose that, right? So you start to move very differently in life when you start to have money coming from all those different sources. And again, to get started, it may feel difficult because you may think, oh gosh, I'm so like already burned out and overwhelmed from my full-time job. But actually, as you start to engage with that, as you start to bring those little money in, you start to realize like, oh, that isn't that bad. Maybe actually I could go down 4 days a week in my main job because now I have this extra source of income and a little bit of a safety net in case something happened, right? So this is the kind of squirrel mindset when it comes to money. And the kind of final archetype as you move through that journey, and you can move between those different archetypes. They're not solid archetypes, they're just kind of where you may be. The final kind of archetype is of the lazy tiger. I call it the lazy tiger because I always have this picture of a tiger when he or she is in the jungle. It doesn't stress, it's a king of the jungle. It chills, it's kind of grounded and embodied. And this is where you start to get this kind of sense of stability and sense of confidence with your money and a little bit of security, because probably by then your squirreling away leads you to have some kind of safety fund, right? It's always recommended that you have 3 months put away of your spendings, which creates a buffer that if anything happens with your job or you become sick, you have that kind of little bit of a buffer. So tiger already have that. Tiger already can chill a little bit, knowing that he's not totally like like a hamster or like a squirrel. The tiger is like roar. He's the boss. And tiger have there are two aspects to tiger. So one of the aspects is investing, which I explain in a second, at least the way that I do it. But the important part about tiger is building that sense of enoughness. So when we don't have sense of enoughness, and when it's never enough for us, we can never feel secure and grounded within our money situation, right? We always want more. We always think like, oh, I must buy a better car, I must buy a better house, like there is this kind of sense that you always have to get more, right? And I know it from myself because I've been there myself, working my, high-tech corporate job to the point of burnout because I was like, I need to earn more, I need to get more, I need to get more. If you think about millionaires, if you think about like Elon Musk, that guy gonna be worth like $1 trillion. It's crazy it's crazy to have that much more money, because it's not amount of money that any of us can actually comprehend. But yet somehow it doesn't seem like it's enough, right? So it's always have to keep on going. So working on our enoughness is really important for our nervous system to start kind of relaxing and sitting back. So how did that look for me? One day I was sitting, and I was that was during my studies. I rented out my flat that I kind of own, and I was living in another city, in this nice kind of neighborhood. It wasn't, anything fancy or splendid. It was a small one-bedroom flat. But one day I sat and I looked around and I realized, you know what? I have enough. I have nice, comfortable living situation. I have all the food that I need. I have all the things that I need. I don't really need more. I have literally everything that I need. Okay, I didn't have fancy car, I didn't have a villa, I didn't have a private jet, but I had enough. And that realization not only allowed me to kind of sit back and realize that I don't have to chase money anymore. Like, my investments were already building. I already had saving fund. I realized, like, damn, I can chill out. I can sit back a little bit. I don't have to always be reaching for more. And another thing that enoughness did for me was that I also stopped spending. And again, there is nothing wrong with spending, but we need to be mindful about how we spend. And this is where, I don't like the word frugality, because it seems very restrictive. But when we engage with this kind of mindful consuming and that enoughness, we realize that, you know what, I don't need to buy another dress. I don't need to buy another gadget or another, whatever you're spending money on that, a week later ends up gathering dust on the shelf because actually you never needed it in the first place. It really allows me to kind of sit back and feel that enoughness and stop overspending, which then, of course, led me to save more money because I wasn't constantly saving, right? So that's the first aspect of the tiger, is working on that enoughness. And the second aspect of the tiger is working towards multiplying the money. So really, when I talk about that and when I talk about investing, I talk about long-term investment strategies. Not crypto, not individual stocks, because this kind of stuff, it's one way to totally dysregulate your nervous system. Is high risk savings, it may be high reward when, we all know this story about the crypto people who bought it 10 years ago and now they're millionaires. But actually investing in stuff like that, which is very volatile, which means it just goes up and down all the time, is one way to wreck your nervous system, especially when you don't understand it. I would only recommend to invest in that when you really understand investment, you really understand the global situation, you really know what you're doing. And even then, personally, it's not something I would invest in. What I invest in and what is kind of recommended by that financial independence retire early philosophy is what is called index funds, or FTEs. And I think now we're hearing more and more, I certainly see more and more investment advice that kind of talks about that. So index funds are basically a kind of funds where, rather than investing into individual stocks, so when you buy an Apple stock or Microsoft stock or whatever other company stock that you want, rather than buying individual stocks, index funds, so for example you have US 500, which gathers stocks from 500 top companies in the US and kind of keeps it in the fund. And what you are buying is buying a little bit of that fund. So actually you're buying investment across 500 different companies. which means your risk is much lower, because when one company goes down, it's not such a big deal because you still have 499 other ones, right? So index funds are much more less risk, right? They, historically they always recover, and even actually we've seen, about half a year ago there was a massive dip, caused by President Donald Trump, and all the kind of tariff situation, and it was a very scary moment because suddenly my money kind of went down, and it wasn't pleasant to watch. However, it's historically it's always recovers, and in fact now my stocks kind of are going back up, and back to the kind of where they were before and over, right? And index funds are usually where, if you have a private pension, that's where your pension is invested as well. So in all those different investment options, index funds are relatively safe option. Of course, there's always a risk of losing the money, but it is the kind of safe option. The downside of index funds is that it's not a crazy return, right? It's not like crypto, it's not a get rich overnight scheme. When you invest in index funds, you really have to think about a 10-year timeline to really get a kind of substantial return. And again, what comes into play here is that compound interest, right? So what compound interest means is that you earn index funds typically earn between 8 to 12% every year, right? So if you invest, and now you will see how bad my maths are, but bear with me. If you invest £1,000, then if you get 10%, that's I think £100. The next year, your interest is getting on the £1,000 plus the £100 that you earn in interest. So you already earning £110. And the next year, it's kind of gets on that interest plus that interest plus that interest. And eventually it kind of creates this momentum when your interest start to take over what you had put in, right? So your interest start to grow more than what you've originally putting in. And again, this is why you need time. The longer you can keep that investment, and this is why it's important, in terms of your pensions as well, to start putting money in your pension early so that it have that chance to grow. And again, the thing with investing, because I think it can be so confusing and there's so many conflicting advice, the idea is that, again, we do it in a nervous system friendly way. So we only invest what we are happy to lose, right? So, if I told you right now, go and invest £500 every month, you'll be like, no, that's like so much money. I could never lose that. But if I say, you know what, go invest 50 quid a month, 50 quid. What I realized is like probably I would just blow it on dresses or blow it in the pub or whatever. It's not a big deal if I lost it, right? So I started to put those little bits of money away into investments, and then suddenly I realized like, oh, my money started growing, and then came the year 2 and my money started growing more, and year 3 and 4, and then I started to see that compound interest in place, and I realized, oh shit, this thing is working. And again, this started to motivate me to put more and more and more money away and become much more aggressive with my investments. So this is the kind of system that that allows you to kind of build, first of all, enough kind of safety. You start to build that kind of safety fund where you start to realize like, okay, I have 3 months worth of wages, 3 months worth of my spending. If something happens, it's not such a big deal, so you can relax a little bit already. And then with time, as you start to invest, you start to realize like, hey, maybe there is this possibility of becoming financially independent. meaning that you start to see that possibility of passive income and your money working for you. And again, it is a long journey. It's not something that happens tomorrow, that happens overnight. You have to have that kind of trust and believe that possibility. But I can tell you from my own example and my own journey of going through that it is doable and it is possible. So this is what I know that I just talked for 40 minutes straight and it's a lot of information. You know, if you're curious, you can rewatch this video again. But this is the kind of journey that we go through to build that kind of slowly over time, that financial stability, tracking towards that financial independence. And I tell you from my example, not of somebody, not of six-figure coach, nothing like that. Just a, you know, working class Polish girl, that it is possible for most of us, right? That is doable. And if you start early, it is something that can work for you.